Hi, hello everybody. Hello Seattle, and hello to everybody out there on the internet. This is a first for me, but as you said, I'm Ibarionex. I have been shooting since I was 10 years old, and photography has been my life forever. I can't remember not wanting to take photographs, and I've played various roles in the photographic industry. I worked as an editor for about 8 years with Outdoor Photographer, Digital Photo Pro, some other magazines, and for the last 8 or 9 years I've been doing freelance photography and freelance writing. I've written 5 books on the topic of photography, including Chasing the Light, Improving Your Photography with Available Light. But this is the thing that I'm likely known most for nowadays, which is the Candid Frame. And next year it will be 10 years that I've been doing this. And what the Candid Frame is it's a podcast in which I interview photographers, not about equipment, not about gear, not about technique, but about photography, about leading a creative life. And it spurred me in so many ways, because I created the show because there were a lot of people that I wanted to talk to, whose brains I wanted to pick, and the show was the means by which I did it. So check it out. It's some wonderful photographers up there. But today I'm here to talk to you about how to go up to a stranger and make their photograph. And it's something that a lot of people find intimidating. I do a lot of street photography, so I'm constantly taking pictures of people I don't know, which to a lot of normal people seems completely absurd. Why would you want to make photographs of people you don't know? And for me, there's just a wonderful opportunity for me to be on the street and to make pictures that just make me feel good. And one of the things that I like to do when I'm out on the street is approach people who I think are interesting. And for me, it was growing up, I never saw pictures of people that kind of look like me or people who I grew up with in magazines, in books, and I was always like, why isn't that the case? And so when I started using a camera and going up to people and making their photographs, it was my opportunity to show that you didn't have to be a model or an actress or anything like that, and to be someone who could make a great photograph. So that's been the intent and purpose of everything that I kind of do. So I'm going to walk you through my process for approaching people and making photographs of strangers. But I think the biggest lesson that I can give you is be prepared. I'm walking the streets of Los Angeles or New York or Paris or wherever I am, and one of the first things I do with my camera is that I'm always ready to make a photograph. I may have not even seen the person I'm going to photograph yet, but I want to make sure that the camera doesn't stand in my way. And whether I'm using the NX1 or the NX500, I'm paying attention to certain settings. Like if I walked out today, it's raining today, it's cloudy, I don't have a lot of light. So one of the things that I automatically do is I increase my ISO. As soon as I walk out the door, I'm evaluating the light. How much light do I have to work with? So I'll increase my ISO to 400 or 800, whatever I need to do, in order to ensure that I have a fast enough shutter speed. Because as many of you know, there is nothing more frustrating than taking a picture, thinking that it's fantastic, that it's beautiful. You look at that image on the computer screen, and it's soft. And you look at your shutter speed, and it was 1/15 of a second. And you go, ah! And that's why I pay attention to the light, and I look at my ISO, and the first thing I look at is, what's my shutter speed? Because my shutter speed for me has to be a bare minimum of 1/25 of a second. Sometimes even faster. And then I'll set my ISO, and I usually just set my aperture to about f5.6, okay? So I have my ISO at whatever it is, I set my aperture 5.6, and I see where my shutter speed's at. And as long as my shutter speed is at 1/25 of a second or up, then I'm good. And that's always my starting point, because if I go out there, I don't want to have a shot in front of me, and all of a sudden I hear that long shutter click sound. It goes click, click. And that's my indication to me my shutter speed's too slow. And that's because I had my camera set for a party I shot the night before. And because I haven't checked my camera that morning, the first shot of the day is ruined because I wasn't dutiful enough to pay attention to what's happening with my camera settings. So that's one of the next things that I do. I set my white balance. I know you can set auto white balance, and I shoot raw, but I like setting white balance, and I encourage my students to set their white balance just because it allows you to pay attention to the light. For me, you have to pay attention to the light, and by setting the white balance, not only do you get a more accurate white balance than you do with auto white balance, but more importantly, you start to pay attention to the quality of the light. Not only how much light you have to work with, but is it a sunny day? Is it overcast? Are you dealing with fluorescence? Are you dealing with tungsten? As you start becoming more and more observant about the quality of the light, it starts informing your photographs in a great way. And then focus. By default, the camera will often choose the autofocus points for you. And sometimes I'm working at a very wide aperture, and what I don't want, do not do that. What I don't want is I don't want the camera to focus on something other than my subject. If I'm shooting wide open at f2 and the camera focuses on something behind my subject or in front of my subject, the subject's shot. So I'll either on my camera set a singular AF point or a grouping of AF points. And I'm constantly aware of where exactly that point's going to be in terms of my autofocus. Okay, because I don't want the camera to focus on something other than my subject. So when I'm walking down the street and I see a guy with a face like this, I know I'm not worrying about my camera settings because I'm walking to this guy and my whole focus has to be, I'm going to talk to this guy and I'm going to find something to compliment him about, and then I'm going to say, hey, can I make your photograph? The last thing a guy like this needs to see from me is me putzing around with my camera trying to figure out my settings. That guy's not going to give me a whole lot of time. A lot of my portraits are made within a couple of minutes, sometimes a couple of seconds. And so if I'm focusing on the camera, the focus isn't on him. And so I was able to talk to him for a little bit and go, hey, do you mind if I make your photograph? And he was surprised because he didn't think he was the kind of guy anybody would want to photograph. And he just kept smoking and I kept shooting. And I kept making my photographs. And when he raised that cigarette to his mouth, I was completely happy. But I was able to give him my complete attention as a result of not having to worry about what's happening with my camera. Now, it wasn't always easy for me to approach people that I don't know to ask to make their photograph. I would get that feeling in my stomach where I felt like I was going to throw up. You know, I was just terrified. I would see people and go, oh, they would make a great photograph, and I would walk towards them, and then I'd walk right by them, right? Because all of a sudden that fear would come up into me, and I would just be absolutely terrified at the idea of what are they going to say, what are they going to do. And then one day, I discovered something. My fear, my anxiety largely happened between me seeing that person and me approaching that person. That's where my fear was. And if I could somehow bridge that, I might be able to get past that and be able to make the photograph. So I learned to give people a compliment about something. Because I realized I have no fear about going up to somebody and saying, hey, I like that jacket, or I like that hat, or in this case, oh, I really love your dog. That, going up to someone and saying that, I had no fear about. Going up to someone and saying, can I make your picture, terrified me. I did it one day and I just said to somebody, this woman, hey, I really love your hat. Not with the intention of making a photograph, but just to give her the compliment. And she just radiated when I gave her this compliment. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And as a self-assignment for that month, I would go up to a complete stranger every day and just give them a compliment. Not with the intention of making a photograph, but just to get past that fear of approaching someone I don't know and talking to them. And then after a while, I figured out, based on the way people reacted to the compliment, that I could probably bridge the idea of making their photograph. Because suddenly those people understood why I wanted to make a photograph of them. Because if you've ever gone up to a stranger and asked to take their picture, what's the first thing they ask? Well, what do you want me to take my picture for? What is this for? But by giving someone a compliment, they immediately understood what it was about them that I found interesting about them and why I would want to make their photograph. And so when I saw this guy and go, hey, do you mind if I take a picture of your dog? Cute dog. And he said, oh, I don't mind. And he was buried in there. So I had already had my camera set, everything. So I was able to compose the shot. He didn't realize I was using a wide angle lens and I was including him in the shot. I really wanted to make a photograph of him and the dog, not just the dog. But he has no context in terms of what I'm seeing in the frame. And I'm starting to make my pictures and he goes, do you mind if I smoke? And I say, oh, please do, right? Because I knew that gesture when he brought the cigarette to his mouth would be the gesture that would really complete the shot for me. And I just love catching this moment. So it's the compliment for me that has really been the key. People always wonder, well, how do you approach people? What's the secret? And there's no real secret. All you have to do is demonstrate a sincere interest in another human being. And one of the greatest ways of doing it is just by giving somebody a compliment. Imagine when was the last time that a perfect stranger came up to you and complimented you on something? It's pretty rare, right? But when you are complimented, how do you react? You're surprised, you're taken aback a little bit, but you're really kind of pleased that something about you was special enough that someone wanted to point it out and say, I really like that about you. And then I use that to my advantage when I go out and photograph someone. I was having lunch near my studio, and I saw this guy come in, and I was just like, I gotta photograph this guy. I mean, he had the face, he had the hat, he just looked amazing, and I had that same, curdling in the middle of my stomach about approaching this guy, and I finally got up the nerve and said, man, I love the way that you look in that hat. Can I make your photograph? And at first he was kind of hesitant, and I kind of insisted, and his wife, who's in the background, was just laughing hysterically, right? She just couldn't believe that, in this restaurant, the stranger's asking to make his photograph. And I just made a couple of frames, and I just love this shot. And, I started off at an aperture of 5.6, but I made it a little wider. But but because I knew what my settings were, all I had to do was all I had to do was change my aperture. I knew that everything else that I had with respect to my camera was fine. And like I said, I often don't have a lot of time with these people that I'm meeting. So I don't have the leisure of sitting with these people for half an hour. So you only have a very short amount of time to sort of build rapport. And one of the things that I'll do is when I'm approaching someone, usually I do not photograph them in the exact spot where I found them, because usually the light and the background isn't particularly good. So I've already sort of prefigured exactly where I'm going to take this person, where the light's better, where I have a cleaner and simpler background, where I'll be able to move them. But during that time, I'm talking to them, and I'm asking about a little bit of their story, who they are, how do they live there. If I've complimented them on something like the hat, where'd you pick up the hat? And I'm talking to them, trying to engage with them. So at the moment when I sit down and make the photograph, I'm able to do it. This was a waitress in a restaurant that I had been eating at, and she was about to have lunch, and I just started talking to her about, how long have you been working here, and just general chit chat, and then I just slowly made the photograph, because I wanted her to just be relaxed, and I just said, just look at me, you don't have to smile. I typically don't ask people to smile in my photographs. I want them to be as natural as possible. And as I said before, lighting and setting is essential for me. 95% of the time, I'm not going to photograph someone where I find them. Sometimes I do, but not most times. Because I find that what you want to do is you want to photograph people in the best light possible, and you want to have a background that is simple, as clean as possible. And that was the case, this guy. I saw him downtown, and I was like, oh, I got to photograph this guy. But immediately as I was moving towards him, I was already thinking, where am I going to put him? I'm going in with the assumption that this person is going to say yes, and once he says yes, I need to know where to put him, because I don't want a shot where I have a cluttered background. I was at a fiddle festival, and I saw this young man dressed in this uniform, and they had this old cottage, and I moved him over there because it was just the perfect setting for the photograph. if I had photographed him where I found him, there are all these people that were around him that would have been very, very distracting, would have minimized the impact of the shot. I'll go and photograph at fairs or festivals, and there you don't have a lot of control over the background, right? You know, there's just so much stuff that you really may not be able to pull somebody aside and say, hey, can I photograph you here? So in that case, I'll use like a long lens. They have a nice telephoto lens at Samsung that I use with the NX1 sometimes, and it allows me to blow out the background. Because there are a lot of people in both of these shots in the background, but I'm shooting it at f2.8 at f4 at about 150 to 200 millimeters, and I'm able to completely blow out the background. I'm still conscious of the background because I was still eyeing when people were walking behind the subjects, and I was waiting for people to move completely out of my frame so I could make the shot. But I'm still consciously aware of what's happening in my background because I want to make it as clean and as simple as I can. Okay, I don't even know what that is, but the idea here is about when people agree to be photographed by you, they are surrendering control for those few minutes. And when people say yes, don't hesitate to say, can I move you over here? Can I move you over to this light? Because I want to make a better photograph of you. And that is something that you should take advantage of. A lot of people will photograph someone where they are, even though everything in terms of the light in the background just doesn't work. And don't do that. And what I do constantly is I'll ask people to move here and to move there, and I'll explain why. And people will be agreeable to doing it because they're surrendering control to you because they assume that you know what you're doing. And even if you don't know what you're doing, you act as if you do. This guy, I photographed in a pier in the beaches in Southern California, and I saw this guy, and I knew I wanted to photograph him. I saw that little balloon hat that he was wearing, and he was in an area with his friends that was just too busy. It was just a bunch of clutter. But I knew I wanted to move him against this blue wall, so I went over there and I said, hey, can I make your photograph? Let me move you over here. And I just started making my photographs, but he started mugging for me. He was doing all this stuff, right? And most people would just make a couple of photographs because they don't want to overstay their welcome. They'll go, oh, thank you very much. And I kept shooting because I didn't want him mugging for me. So I just kept making photographs, and he kept mugging, right? And eventually he was just like, this guy's not stopping making pictures. And at some point, he relaxed, and I got that. And that's one of the things that I'll do is I will not rush my photographs. I will just keep shooting because most people are expecting me to make 1 or 2 photographs, and I'm sitting there waiting for that moment where they're not giving me the face. You know, when you photograph kids, they sometimes give you the smile, the face, and I'll just keep shooting because they can't hold on to that forever. At some point, they're going to have to let that go, and that moment is the moment that I'm looking for. I'm looking for that moment where they suddenly relax, and then they are themselves for that split second. Just photographing this guy, I was walking down the street, and I saw this guy working out, and I was just like, oh yes. I saw the light on him, and I ran over there, and I said, hey, do you mind if I make a photograph while you're working out? And he was like, very cool. And I'd already assessed the scene from across the street. I saw that the light was great. He was in a perfect spot. I knew I wanted to include the sign that indicated where the gym was, and the only thing I needed to do was get down low, almost to the curb, so I could shoot up at him. And again, my camera, I didn't have to worry about my settings for my camera at all. All I needed to do is wait for the moment where he was exerting himself, almost that moment in between fully exerting himself and him beginning to push it up. And I just love the expression on his face here. This was for MLK parade. I was just walking at the beginning of a parade, which is my suggestion as the best time to photograph a parade is not during the parade, but before the parade when everyone's getting ready, because you can approach people and make their photographs. And I saw these guys, and I was just like, oh, I've got to make the photograph. And I got them together. And this was a situation where I didn't have control of the background, but I chose to move my camera down, not from eye level, but down to about waist level, and move in and make it as tight as possible. And all of these guys' faces and the way they are together in that frame, it's just works for me. This was down in Guadalajara. I walked into a pool hall. I heard the billiard balls, and it just stopped me cold. And I ran. Where is the sound coming from? And I walked into this pool hall, and these guys were playing pool and dominoes. And I just went in there, and I speak Spanish, and I asked, "Can I make your photographs?" And they were like, "Okay." And I just started making images, and this is one of the few times where I actually used flash because it was really dark in there. But I saw the balls, and I saw this guy's hat, and he was writing up the score, and I said, "Hold on a little bit." And I made the photograph, and I made this shot, and I just love how the colors just gel so beautifully here. Again, festivals are great times if you have any sort of fear or trepidation of photographing strangers, especially performers. This was at a Zydeco festival, and these people were just doing the jazz band that they do in New Orleans, how they walk the streets, and these people were performing, and I got in there. I got in nice and tight, and I just kept up shooting in a way that typically people wouldn't feel very comfortable, but because they were so immersed in what they were doing, it wasn't a problem for me to get in there and just make the shot, because I knew I wanted the immediacy of that this kind of proximity gives you. Again, the show that I do is called thecandidframe.com. And one of the things that I did, I recently joined TWIP, which some of you may know. It's This Week in Photography. It's a network of photo-related podcasts, and they have just a bunch of great shows. But I wrote an ebook on street photography, and I'm making it available for free. So if you go to thisweekinphoto.com/thecandidframe, you can download it for free. And then you'll hear a lot of the techniques that I'm talking about here, as well as some tips in general about street photography. But I have a little time before I go. Does anybody have any questions? I'll be glad to answer them. Could you speak up a little bit so I can hear you? Oh, his question is, when did I started using the word making photographs rather than taking photographs? I don't know exactly when I started to use the word make, but it just seemed more apropos for what I do. I feel that taking photographs doesn't include the intentionality that I like to infuse my photography with. I like to feel like everything that I'm doing in terms of doing with the camera and what I'm doing in terms of my interaction with people and how I'm utilizing space and bringing it all together, there's an intentionality there that I don't attribute to just taking a photograph. I think taking a photograph, you can attribute it to just pressing a shutter release on the shutter release button on the camera and then taking the shot. I think as a photographer, I like to take ownership about everything. If you take a look at one of my photographs, I will tell you the entire thought process that went behind it and led me to make the photograph. And that for me is why I feel like I'm successful as a photographer, is because I put that kind of mentality into it. One more? Can you come closer? I'm sorry. Okay. The question is, how often will people ask me to send them a photograph? Surprisingly enough, not a lot of people. Sometimes I'll offer my card and say, hey, if you email me, I'll be glad to send you a picture. Or I'll get their information and I'll send them an email. And most times I don't hear back. And it surprises me sometimes. But I think that people just like that momentary engagement, and then they're off to do whatever they're going to do. So it's not a big deal. But as you know, if I really like the photographs and in my gut I feel like this is going to be a great shot, I'll get their info and I'll send it to them, because I'm just pleased with it, and I think I want to share that with someone. So that's my time. I just want to thank everyone for coming out and listening to me, and for everyone on the internet. Thank you very much. And again, remember, go to the Candid Frame go to thisweekinphoto.com/thecandidframe, and there you'll be able to listen to past episodes of the show and get the free ebook. So, thank you very much, guys. Have a great show.